Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. This is Thursday, January 30th, 2025, and if you've been watching the forecast with any attention over the past several days, you already know that the UK is bracing for what meteorologists are now calling a particularly aggressive stretch of winter weather. We're talking about Storm Chandra, which has already been named by the Met Office, barreling toward us with the kind of intensity that demands serious preparation, and right on its heels, literally within days, another deep low-pressure system is organising itself over the Atlantic, ready to deliver a second punch before we've even recovered from the first. The Met Office has issued yellow warnings covering substantial portions of the country, with particular emphasis on wind and rain impacts that are going to affect daily life. Transportation networks and coastal communities through the weekend and well into next week. We're looking at wind gusts potentially exceeding 70 miles per hour in exposed locations. Rainfall totals that could surpass 50 millimetres in the wettest areas within relatively compressed timeframes, and the kind of rapid-fire atmospheric assault that leaves little breathing room between systems. Let me walk you through exactly what we're dealing with here, starting with Storm Chandra itself, which is currently positioned over the North Atlantic and tracking eastward on a path that brings it directly into contact with the UK starting Friday morning. The system has been deepening rapidly. We're talking about central pressure values dropping into the low 97s in millibars, which represents a fairly robust area of low pressure that's going to generate significant pressure gradients across the British Isles. What that means in practical terms is wind, serious wind, with the strongest gusts expected across western coastal areas of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, where exposed headlands and elevated terrain could see gusts reaching 65 to 75 miles per hour during the peak of the storm Friday afternoon and evening. The Met Office warning specifically highlights the potential for disruption to transportation, damage to structures and trees, and dangerous conditions near coastal areas where large waves will be combining with high winds to create hazardous situations. Now, as Chandra moves through Friday and into Friday night, the wind field expands eastward, meaning that even inland areas of England are going to experience gusts in the 45 to 55 mile per hour range, which is absolutely enough to cause travel disruptions, particularly for high-sided vehicles on motorways and exposed bridges. But here's where this gets particularly challenging. Storm Chandra isn't just a wind event. The system is dragging with it a series of weather fronts that are going to deliver substantial rainfall, especially across western-facing slopes, where orographic enhancement is going to wring out moisture from those Atlantic air masses. We're looking at rainfall totals through Friday and into Saturday morning that could reach 40 to 60 millimetres across parts of northwest England, Wales and western Scotland, with the highest accumulations likely in the typical wet spots. Places like Cumbria, Snowdonia, and the Western Highlands where terrain really amplifies precipitation. The concern here is that ground conditions are already saturated from recent rainfall, meaning that absorption capacity is limited and runoff is going to be quick, increasing the risk of localised flooding, particularly in urban areas with overwhelmed drainage systems and in river valleys, where watercourses are going to respond rapidly to this additional input. The Scottish Environment Protection Agency and Natural Resources, Wales, have both issued flood alerts for numerous areas, and residents in flood-prone locations absolutely need to be monitoring those alerts closely because conditions can deteriorate quickly once rainfall rates intensify. Now, let's talk timing with precision here because the window of worst conditions is fairly well defined at this point. Storm Chandra's initial impacts begin Friday morning, probably around 6 to 8 a.m. across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, with winds ramping up quickly through the morning hours. By Friday midday, we're looking at peak wind conditions across the western UK, and those strong winds persist through Friday afternoon and into Friday evening, before gradually beginning to ease overnight Friday into Saturday as the low centre moves away towards Scandinavia. However, and this is critical, the easing is relative. We're not returning to calm conditions Saturday, because even as Chandra pulls away, the atmospheric pattern remains unsettled, and this brings us to the second act of this weather drama. Right behind Storm Chandra, tracking across the Atlantic, and expected to approach the UK by Sunday into Monday, this is another area of low pressure that models are currently suggesting could be nearly as potent as Chandra itself. This system hasn't been named yet because it hasn't met the criteria for storm naming, but the Met Office is watching it very closely, and there's a reasonable chance it will earn a name as we get closer and its intensity becomes more certain. What we know right now is that this second low is forecast to take a similar track, approaching from the west and delivering another round of strong winds and heavy rainfall starting Sunday afternoon or evening and continuing into Monday and potentially Tuesday. Early indications suggest wind gusts again in the 50 to 65 mile per hour range for western areas, with another slug of heavy precipitation that could add another 30 to 50 millimetres to already rain-soaked regions. The cumulative effect here is what concerns meteorologists. We're talking about back-to-back systems hitting the same areas with minimal recovery time in between, which compounds impacts and increases the likelihood of more significant disruptions. Let me break down the regional impacts more specifically because where you are absolutely matters in terms of what you're going to experience. For Scotland, particularly the Western Isles, the Highlands and coastal areas along the west coast, you're looking at the most intense conditions from both systems. Storm Chandra arrives Friday morning with wind gusts potentially reaching 70 to 75 miles per hour on the most exposed coastlines and islands, combined with heavy rain that could deliver 50 to 70 millimetres by Saturday morning. Travel disruptions are very likely. CalMac ferry services have already indicated they're monitoring the situation closely and expecting cancellations. And if you have travel plans involving island communities or exposed routes, you need contingency plans because services are going to be suspended during the worst of the weather. The second system, Sunday into Monday, brings similar conditions, meaning the Western Highlands and Islands are essentially getting hammered twice within about 60 hours. Northern Ireland is under yellow warnings for wind from Friday morning through Friday evening, with gusts expected to reach 55 to 65 miles per hour, particularly along the north and west coasts. Rainfall totals through Friday should be in the 25 to 40 millimetre range, which is significant but not as extreme as what Scotland is facing. However, the second low-pressure system, early next week, could be more impactful for Northern Ireland depending on its exact track, so residents there need to stay tuned to updated forecasts because there's still some uncertainty about the precise positioning of that second system. Wales, particularly northwest Wales and coastal Pembrokeshire, you're in for a rough Friday with wind gusts reaching 60 to 70 miles per hour on exposed coasts and over higher terrain like Snowdonia. Rainfall is going to be substantial. We're looking at potential accumulations of 50 to 80 millimetres across the mountains through Saturday morning, with flood risks in typical problem areas. Natural resources, Wales has already issued multiple flood warnings, and you absolutely need to be aware of your local situation if you're in a flood-prone area. The second system early next week brings another round, likely adding 30 to 50 millimetres more rain, which means cumulative totals from Friday through Tuesday could exceed 100 millimetres in the wettest spots. That's a lot of water in a compressed time frame. For England, the impacts are somewhat graduated based on your position. Northwest England, particularly Cumbria and Lancashire, you're getting hit hardest with wind gusts, Friday afternoon reaching 50 to 60 miles per hour, and rainfall potentially exceeding 60 millimetres through Saturday, especially over higher ground. The Lake District is going to see substantial precipitation, with all the usual suspects, places like Seathwaite and Honister Pass, likely recording impressive totals. Southwest England, including Cornwall and Devon, I expect wind gusts Friday afternoon and evening in the 55 to 65 mile per hour range, particularly on exposed coastal headlands, with moderate rainfall of 20 to 35 millimetres. As you move eastward and inland, impacts diminish somewhat but don't disappear. Central and eastern England are still looking at gusty conditions, Friday with winds in the 40 to 50 mile per hour range, enough to cause travel disruptions and make driving conditions challenging, particularly on exposed sections of motorway. South East England, including London and the home counties, you're on the fringe of the worst conditions but not immune. Expect Friday to be blustery with gusts around 40 to 45 miles per hour and periods of heavy rain that could deliver 15 to 25 millimetres through the day. It's not catastrophic weather for the southeast, but it's certainly disruptive weather that's going to affect outdoor plans and possibly cause some travel delays. Now let's talk about what this means for your daily life over the next several days, because understanding the forecast is one thing, but adapting your plans appropriately is what actually keeps you safe. First and foremost, travel on Friday is going to be significantly disrupted, particularly in the afternoon and evening when Storm Chandra is at peak intensity. If you have travel plans involving western areas, Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales or Northwest England, seriously consider whether that journey is necessary. If it can be postponed, postpone it. If it cannot be postponed, build in substantial extra time, check conditions immediately before departure, And be prepared to turn back if conditions deteriorate beyond what's safe. High-sided vehicles, lorries, caravans, motorhomes, are particularly vulnerable in high winds, and there will likely be restrictions on certain bridges and exposed roadways. The Forth Road Bridge, Severn Bridge, and various sections of the M6 and A55 in Wales are all candidates for restrictions or closures during the worst conditions. Rail services are also going to be affected. Fallen trees, debris on tracks, and speed restrictions due to high winds all contribute to delays and cancellations, and you need to check with your service provider before travelling and stay flexible. Air travel through Friday, particularly at airports like Glasgow, Belfast, Manchester and Cardiff, expect delays and possibly cancellations due to crosswinds exceeding safe landing limits. If you're flying Friday or have someone arriving, monitor flight status closely and stay in communication. For those on the coast, particularly western and northern coasts, Friday is not a day for coastal walks or wave watching. We're going to see very large waves combining with high winds, creating genuinely dangerous conditions with risks of being swept into the sea or struck by wave-thrown debris. Coastal flood risks are elevated during high tides, particularly Friday afternoon and evening, and residents in coastal communities vulnerable to tidal flooding need to be monitoring Environment Agency and Scottish Environment Protection Agency warnings. Storm Chandra is arriving during a period when tides aren't astronomically extreme, but the combination of wave action, surge, and wind setup can still drive water levels high enough to cause problems in vulnerable locations. At home, before Storm Chandra arrives Friday morning, secure outdoor items, garden furniture, trampolines, bins, anything that could become airborne in 60 or 70 mile/hour winds. Check your property for potential weak points, loose roof tiles, damaged guttering, unstable fencing, and address what you can or at least be aware of problem areas so you can respond quickly if issues develop. If you lose power during the storm, which is possible particularly in rural areas where tree damage could bring down power lines, have torches, charged devices, and backup plans for heating and cooking. Mobile networks can also be affected by power outages. Also consider alternative communication methods and make sure family members know how to reach each other if normal channels fail. Agricultural communities, particularly in western areas, Friday and the weekend following are going to be challenging. Livestock need shelter access, and in the most exposed areas, consideration should be given to moving animals to more protected locations if possible. Structural damage to outbuildings and fencing is a real risk in winds of this magnitude, and farmers need to be assessing vulnerable structures and reinforcing what can be reinforced. The second system arriving early next week means there's very little time to recover and repair before getting hit again. So prioritising the most critical vulnerabilities right now is important. So looking at the extended outlook beyond Storm Chandra and the second low-pressure system, the pattern through early to mid-February remains unsettled. We're not seeing signs of a blocking pattern establishing itself that would bring prolonged settled weather. Instead, the jet stream is forecast to remain active and relatively far south, which means the UK stays in the firing line for Atlantic weather systems. This doesn't necessarily mean we have another named storm immediately following these two systems, but it does mean that the week of February 3rd through 10th continues to look unsettled, with further areas of low pressure tracking near or across the UK, bringing additional periods of wind and rain. The temperature pattern through this period remains mild for late January and early February. We're looking at daytime highs generally in the 8 to 12 Celsius range, well above the climatological average for this time of year, with overnight lows mostly staying above freezing, except in sheltered inland areas. This is fully consistent with the Atlantic-dominated pattern we're experiencing, where mild maritime air masses are constantly being advected over the UK from the southwest. From a climatological perspective, what we're experiencing isn't particularly unusual for a UK winter, in that Atlantic storms are a normal feature of our winter weather. But the intensity and frequency packed into this particular period, two significant systems within about 4 days, is noteworthy and represents the more active end of the spectrum. Storm Chandra is the 9th named storm of the 2024 to 2025 season, which puts us slightly ahead of average pace for storm naming. And if the second system earns a name, we'd be moving into the letter D in the naming sequence, which would be Storm Dara or whatever name is next on the list. The season runs from September through August, and we're now in the heart of the climatologically most active period for winter storms, which peaks in January and February. The broader context here involves the position and strength of the jet stream, which is currently configured in a way that steers these Atlantic lows directly toward the UK, rather than deflecting them to the north toward Iceland or to the south towards southern Europe. That configuration is driven by larger-scale atmospheric patterns, including the state of the North Atlantic Oscillation, which has been in a fairly neutral to slightly positive phase recently, and the Madden-Julian Oscillation, which influences tropical convection and has downstream effects on mid-latitude flow patterns. The specific meteorological drivers are complex, but the practical result is what we're all experiencing: an active storm track aimed right at us. Safety needs to remain the absolute priority over the next several days. The Met Office warnings are in place for very good reasons. These aren't precautionary warnings for marginal conditions. These are warnings for legitimately hazardous weather that can and will cause disruption and has the potential to cause harm if people don't take appropriate precautions. Listen to official guidance, avoid unnecessary travel during the worst conditions, stay away from coastal areas during storms, and check on vulnerable neighbours who may need assistance preparing their properties or who may be isolated if conditions deteriorate. The emergency services are going to be stretched during periods of severe weather, so taking personal responsibility for your own safety and the safety of those around you reduces the burden on those services and keeps them available for genuine emergencies. I'll be tracking these systems continuously over the next several days and providing updates as conditions evolve and as forecast confidence improves regarding the second low-pressure system early next week. If you want to stay informed with the latest information, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and have notifications turned on so you don't miss updates as these storms approach and move through. This is definitely a weather situation that warrants close monitoring, and I'm committed to keeping you informed with accurate, timely information as events unfold. Stay safe out there. Take these warnings seriously and make smart decisions about travel and outdoor activities over the next several days. I'll see you in the next update, and until then, look after yourselves and each other.